rain, which could fall as sleet or snow in places. Wintry showers will feed into northern Scotland as well, but further south a good deal of dry and fairly clear weather is on the cards. As elsewhere though, a chilly northerly wind will persist. Those winds will be a little lighter across Northern Ireland, and here a mix of clear spells and scattered showers is expected. Temperatures will be falling away under the clearer breaks. Overnight, a widespread frost will form with some ice too, especially in the north and east.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Join me, Nana Akweer, on Fridays, Saturdays and Sunday afternoons here on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as my panel and I take on some of the top stories hitting the headlines.
You can look up the statistics.
No, you look it up. I hug everyone on it. We'll learn from it and try and move on. That's it. Opinion is at the heart of the show. It's a place for open and frank conversation, but without the fear of cancellation. So join me here on GB News on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons between 4 and 6 p.m.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
I'm Bethany Elsey. This is your news at 3 o'clock. 2 people in the UK have tested positive for the new Omicron variant of COVID. The confirmed cases are in Chelmsford and Nottingham. Their households are now self-isolating. Britain is the 3rd country in Europe to confirm Omicron has reached its shores after Germany and Belgium. The government have added extra African countries to the travel red list to try and curb the spread. Scientists are racing to tweak vaccines amid concerns the new strain could be resistant to existing protection.
Paper, this is as bad a variant as we perhaps would have dreamed to draw up, at least on paper. But we know that, on paper is very different from the real world situation. So there is circumstantial evidence that this is behaving much as we fear it might in terms of its infectiousness. But of course, the big thing would be, does it evade any of the immunity that's been built up in so many countries now?
2 people have died after being struck by falling trees as Storm Arwen hit the UK with 100-mile-an-hour winds overnight. More than 100,000 homes have experienced power cuts across the UK. Yellow weather warnings remain in place, and the Met Office are advising people to only travel if absolutely necessary. Security Minister Damian Hinds insists relations between the UK and France remain strong. It's after a diplomatic spat between the two countries over how to deal with migrants crossing the Channel. Mr Hinds defended Boris Johnson's move to tweet a letter to French President Emmanuel Macron, calling it supportive and collaborative. It follows the deaths of 27 migrants when their boat sank in the Channel on Wednesday. Former England cricket captain Michael Vaughan says he's sorry for the hurt his former teammate Azeem Rafiq has experienced. Earlier this month, Rafiq told MPs he faced institutional racism at Yorkshire. Vaughan was among a number of figures implicated in the case, but he denies the claims. Tributes have poured in for the American composer and songwriter Stephen Sondheim, who's died aged 91. He was best known for musicals including Sweeney Todd and West Side Story. Andrew Lloyd Webber says he was a musical theatre giant, and Steven Spielberg says he was a gigantic figure in American culture. Pharmacists in Scotland are on a knife edge after being overworked. A new survey from the Royal Pharmaceutical Society reveals almost 9 in 10 people working in the sector fear they're at risk of being burnt out, and almost a third are considering quitting the job. Police have released an image of a van they're searching for as part of the investigation into the fatal stabbing of 12-year-old Ava White. Officers believe key witnesses may have been travelling in the vehicle. 4 teenage boys aged between 13 and 15 have been arrested on suspicion of murder. Hundreds of migrants from Central America and Haiti are marching from southern Mexico to the United States border. Around 1,000 people, many carrying children, started walking from a city near Guatemala and are planning to join another group before they reach the border. The festive season is officially underway at Westminster. Parliamentary staff used a crane to unload and decorate their rare 42-feet Christmas tree. The spruce was selected from the 60,000-hectare Kielder Forest in Northumberland, and that's the biggest forest in England. And Royal Mail has announced the regional winners of a competition for young people to design stamps based on heroes of the pandemic. Children aged 4 to 14 designed stamps to celebrate a range of people, including NHS workers, parents and teachers. The Prince of Wales will select the final 8 designs. That's the latest headlines. We'll have more in an hour.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
A few blustery showers will continue to affect Cornwall this evening, but elsewhere across the southwest it'll be dry with clear periods. Still generally feeling cold, though, in the northerly breeze. The southeast of England will be cloudy with a gust of wind, and here a few outbreaks of rain and hill sleet are possible. A few showers will brush in from the north into the western parts of Wales. Elsewhere across the country it will be dry but chilly. A bit of an east to west split is likely across the Midlands. Cloudy and windy weather will affect the east with the odd patch of rain or sleet, whilst further west clearer skies are likely. It remains blustery across the northeast of England heading into the evening, with an ongoing risk of some rain which could fall as sleet or snow in places. Wintry showers will feed into northern Scotland as well, but further south a good deal of dry and fairly clear weather is on the cards. As elsewhere though, a chilly northerly wind will persist. Those winds will be a little lighter across Northern Ireland, and here a mix of clear spells and scattered showers is expected. Temperatures will be falling away under the clearer breaks. Overnight, a widespread frost will form with some ice too, especially in the north and east.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About, your weekend fix, where I pose a question that needs plenty of time for discussion. And today, we need to talk about violence against women. Every day you open a paper or switch on the news, there's likely to be a story about a woman who has been murdered, assaulted, or abused. My ever-vigilant superwoman producer Polly did a speed audit of today's headlines in our morning meeting and counted no fewer than 14 unique stories relating to violence against women. 14. From an MOD report into the heightened risk of domestic abuse in military families, to serving police officers still allowed to work despite allegations of the same, to the latest celebrity male accused of beating up his girlfriend. All around the world, women are still being killed, raped, or controlled on a daily basis. 1 in 3 globally will come to some form of harm at the hands of a man. In the UK, the statistic is marginally better, but still 1 in 4. A quarter. In fact, let's roll through those stats, as this month is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So let's all become aware. It is worth contextualising today's show to explain why we are doing it. Every 3 days, a woman is killed by a man in the UK. Probably more frequently than you buy a pint of milk. 70% of these murders took place in their own homes. 1.6 million women were victims of domestic abuse last year. 1.6 million. That's the equivalent of the entire populations of Birmingham, Manchester and Aberdeen all put together in 1 year. Seriously. 1 in 5 women will suffer sexual abuse, with that figure getting dangerously higher the younger you are. For girls under 25 in the UK, 1/3 will now experience some form of sexual abuse. Your sister, your daughter, your niece, your neighbour, your colleague. With numbers like that, it is almost a certainty that you know one, even though you may not realise it. Now let's see how normalised all of this is. Let's think of a handful of song lyrics that treat women as objects or even purport to actually abuse them. Do a quick inventory of films or some of the most popular TV shows around right now and ask yourself whether they portray a form of abuse towards women. A little self-start survey probably yields a horrifying truth, that we are extremely used to hearing song lyrics such as Smack That, top the charts, or watching films like A Talented Young Woman and Bombshell expose routine horrors faced by females, or programmes that brilliantly depict a chillingly accurate portrayal of violence, coercion and control, such as Angela Black on ITV right now, or Maid, currently on Netflix, both worth a watch. Now, transpose all of this into a setting where the victims are instead repeatedly of a specific race or creed or hair colour or even name, and you would call it scarily targeted systemic abuse on an industrial scale. While women may not be a minority, there is little to suggest that in the 21st century they are more respected, protected or safe than before. Crimes have changed. Abuse is more sophisticated, with an entirely new slew of offences, from revenge porn to imported misogyny, such as female genital mutilation and forced marriage. Protection and care services are perhaps growing in number, but are still woefully overburdened. 6,000 women this year alone are on the waiting list for rape support services, while a YouGov survey carried out by UN Women UK found that a staggering 96% of girls don't think the police have the ability to handle incidents of abuse and harassment, with almost half saying they wouldn't bother to report it. Something is going dreadfully wrong when that is the widely held opinion in a developed world country in 2021. Things should be getting better, not worse. It pains me to have to say it, but recent atrocities such as those against Sabrina Nessa and Sarah Everard demonstrate that today we still really need to talk about violence against women. Well, to open up proceedings on this very difficult topic is domestic abuse lead at Victim Support, Valerie Wise. Valerie, give us a sense of how prevalent violence against women still is today.
Well, you've given some amazing statistics which have actually shown this. And the fact is that domestic abuse has gone up during the COVID pandemic, and it still remains high. For example, we've looked at our figures and we get a huge number of referrals to us. In the last 3 months, we've had 25% more referrals than in the same 3 months in 2019. 25%. That is a huge amount. We've also seen an increase in domestic abuse cases where rape or other sexual assaults have taken place. So as you've actually clearly demonstrated, violence against women and girls is endemic, and this includes domestic abuse. And it's shocking that for many women, their home is not a safe place. And what we would say is for anyone that has been affected, Victim Support is here to provide practical help and emotional support. You can contact our 24/7 support line on 0808 1689111 or use our live chat services via the website www.victimsupport.org.uk. And you don't even need to report a crime to get in touch with us, and we are completely independent from the police.
Thank you. I mean, Valerie, we're going to make sure that those details are put up on Twitter and are available for any viewers watching this who the themes might resonate with, should get in contact if they have concerns. Valerie, why is this the situation in 2021? Why does it seem like incidents of domestic violence are increasing? Why are we still seeing attacks against women in the streets? We've got now the police and the army admitting they both have an issue when it comes to domestic violence amongst their own staff. You would have thought by now, in an increasingly egalitarian society, that women were no longer being harmed in this way. What do you think is behind this?
Well, we still live in a misogynistic society where violence and against and abuse against women and girls is an everyday occurrence. And I think it's only a system-wide societal change that will end violence against women, including domestic abuse. We need to challenge male violence and abuse against women and girls. And as a society, we need to promote a culture that does not allow or accept violence and abuse against women and girls. More needs to be done to address the epidemic of offending against women and girls across health, education and the wider justice system. And when you talk about the police and the army, this isn't actually anything new. This has been going on for years and years and years, unfortunately. I think what is now happening is because there's been so much publicity around violence against women and girls, even the police and the army have to recognise that more needs to be done. And there needs to be a culture change in both of these organisations. For example, I know of a police officer, a female police officer, who was abused by her husband, a fellow police officer, and he knew exactly what to do to make her life difficult and also caused her problems within the police force. I mean, luckily, in the end, that's been dealt with, and she is still a serving police officer. And we've had there's been a recent report from Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services, which found a staggering variation in the way domestic abuse was dealt with across police forces in England and Wales, adding, I mean, she did say the response has improved, but I have to say there's a long way to go. So it's very much a postcode lottery, depending where you live, what sort of treatment you'll get. There are some amazing police officers who do a really brilliant job and really want to ensure that the offender is brought to justice. But there's other places where, you know, women don't get the support that they need, and, you know, they're not believed. I think the first thing is police need to believe a woman when she says she's been a victim of domestic abuse or some other sort of violence. And I mean, for example, I know of a case of a young woman who actually was so frightened in her home, and she was possibly going to be experiencing honour-based abuse. The police did come and get her out of there and put her in a hotel. However, when she went to the local police station to report this, they just told her, go back home and make up with your family. You know, she could have ended up dead if that is what she'd done. So I just think there is still a huge amount that needs to be done. And I do think it's very good that 11 police forces are now recording misogyny as a hate crime. And it was the female chief constable in Nottingham that actually started this. And she said that it sent a powerful message that this behaviour is not acceptable and that there will be consequences. But there's still 32 police forces who don't record misogyny as a hate crime.
Valerie, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this topic with us today. Valerie is, of course, the domestic abuse lead at Victim Support, and the number that she gave us earlier, 0808 168 9111. We're going to put that on Twitter. So if anybody finds that what we're talking about today matters to them and they need someone to talk to, they can access that service. Right, we're now going to speak to someone who has suffered male violence herself. Charlotte Ankers was the victim of domestic abuse between 2015 and 2019. Charlotte, thank you for joining us today.
Hello.
To tell us your story. So explain what was going on during that period. What sort of things were you suffering?
A lot of it was coercive, controlling behaviour. So he started to gaslight me, making me feel like I was this special woman. I was the only one that he loved. He'd buy me presents, take me out. And then after sort of being with him 4 or 5 months, that's when the cracks started to appear.
Yeah.
That's when he would make me pay for everything. I was economic abuse as well. And he wasn't giving me or stopping me getting my money. I was paying for literally everything. And yeah, it put me in over £31,000 of debt, which eventually I had to become bankrupt back in 2019 just to start a fresh slate.
And was he ever physically abusive towards you as well?
Yeah, a lot of it was behind closed doors. Everyone else thinks he's the saints, he's amazing. But behind closed doors, it was a completely different story. He would do a lot of it in front of my daughter. He did sexually abuse me. He was arrested for a sexual assault, but he was released without charge. So that really knocked my confidence with the police force and even trusting them, to be honest, because they didn't help me at all.
There are people watching this who, and you hear it all the time when you find out about instances of domestic violence. Why didn't you just leave? When you realised he was becoming a problem, why did you stick around? That's always a question that people ask, so I want to put that to you. What made you stay?
Well, I actually saw my mum, the effects of afterwards of my mum going through domestic violence before she met my dad. And I was like, if that ever happens to me, I'll leave. But then when you're in that situation, it's completely different. It's terrifying. He's a lot bigger than me. He was a lot more muscly. And I was just terrified of him. Every time even the thought of him was near me, I'd shake, because it's totally different when you're in that situation. And I think the final straw was when my daughter started to become in the firing line and she started to be at risk. I drew the line and was like, I've got to go. I've got to leave. He can kill me for all he cares, but he doesn't touch my daughter, sort of thing. Natural instinct kicked in, and yeah, I made a new life for me and my daughter. And now I have a son and a fiance.
What routes did you use eventually to escape from that situation? Did you phone a support helpline? Did you go to a refuge? How did you manage to extract yourself from that situation?
I had to do it behind closed doors. I had to do it behind his back, because every time I tried to leave, he refused to let me. So I contacted SATIDA and Women's Aid in the UK, and they also put me in contact with counselling, victim support and lawyers like that specialise in domestic abuse, and they got me out. They helped me do that escape plan, and that's what got the ball rolling when I said enough was enough, but I was too scared to leave on my own.
much for coming on today, giving us your story. I'm really pleased to see that everything's turned out well, that you've got a lovely fiancé.
Thank you very much.
Son to go with your daughter, and you seem to be in a great place. You've just heard from domestic abuse lead at Victim Support, Valerie Wise, and Charlotte ANKERS, a victim of domestic abuse between 2015 and 2019. After the break, I'm continuing this conversation with Mark Brooks, the chairman for the Mankind Initiative, a survivor, campaigner and Paladin National Stalking Advocacy Charity board member, ZOE DRONFIELD, and Sussex Police and Crime Commissioner, KATY BOURNE. See you in a couple of minutes. You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
Not all victims of domestic violence are women, and not all perpetrators are men. All who suffer torture, abuse, blackmail, violence, or control deserve support and empathy. All who perpetrate these repugnant crimes should face justice. But the fact remains that the equilibrium is still tilted strongly towards the suffering of women at the hands of men. And yes, thankfully, most men are wonderful, respectful, and decent. But does it surprise you that in 2021 we are still having this conversation? As attitudes and social structures evolve and cultures modernise, you would expect to see significant improvements in this area. Yes, we acknowledge that barbarism and medieval attitudes are still rife in other countries. But we become incredibly prickly and defensive when the mirror reflects our own culture. Do we have a problem? You bet we do. Even a superficial scan of the headlines exposes that women in the UK have every reason to still feel unprotected, disrespected, and tragically distrustful of those we would expect to be able to turn to in our hour of need. Just turning on the TV or radio, you are reminded as a woman that you may not be wise walking home alone from work, that you are still expected to look like an item for sex or tolerate objectification, and that if you dare speak out on any of this, you'll be attacked and silenced for being a man-hater or a feminazi, that you are the problem for even deigning to point out that women still get a pretty rough deal when it comes to the basic rights of simply feeling safe and being respected. There are some new initiatives out there. The Ministry of Defence has drawn up a report looking at how it can reduce the higher incidence of domestic violence in military families. Meanwhile, a boys' school has taken the opportunity to teach teens about the importance of recognising and helping to prevent abuse. Various newspapers are now also carrying stories about the newly raised issue of shocking behaviour of some police officers, the very people we rely on to protect us. So we are talking about it, but why are things not getting any better? The old adage goes that it takes an entire village to raise a child. Well, surely it takes an entire nation to protect a woman. Starting this conversation in this hour is Mark Brooks, Chairman for the Mankind Initiative, which provides support and advice for male victims of domestic abuse and violence. Mark, we've been talking about violence against women today, but the fact is there are still men who are victims of this type of abuse too.
Yeah, absolutely, Alex. I mean, what we're finding is that 1 in 3 of all victims of domestic abuse are actually men, and their figures, government figures, which have been consistent for nearly 2 decades now. And that equates to around 1 in 6 and 1 in 7 men at some stage in their lifetime will be a victim of domestic abuse. And I think when we're talking about domestic abuse, it's important to recognise the female victims, but also it's important at the same time to recognise male victims as well.
Does domestic abuse tend to differ when it comes to whether the perpetrator is a female or a male, or is it's generally emotional blackmail, coercion, escalating into physical abuse?
Generally speaking, the domestic abuse that a man undergoes is exactly the same type of abuse that a female victim does. So there's not really many differences from that aspect. I think some of the slight nuances are around men not understanding that they are victims of domestic abuse, because when society talks about it, it doesn't really talk about it in the way that it's a risk for men. And so therefore it becomes harder for men when they are victims to understand that the abuse that they're going through is actually termed or referenced or classed as domestic abuse. And also they tend to be less aware of the support services which are available to them. So the issues they face are broadly the same, but in some aspects it can be harder for men to escape because they don't realise or recognise that what's happening to them is domestic abuse in the first place.
What services are available to men? Because as you said, when we talk about things like domestic abuse, it is very often in the light of it being a female who's a victim, and there are plenty of refuges set up for women trying to escape the grips of an abusive partner. What options do men have?
Well, if you'd asked me that question 10 years ago, I would have said very few options. But there's been a lot of investment by the government, also in local councils and police and crime commissioners, to make sure that every service or every town, every county, every city in the UK has a service that's available for male victims. They're very often available for female victims as well, which is good, but also they support men. So the real message is for any man who's listening to this, or any friend or family member who thinks they know that a man's at risk of domestic abuse, is that there are national helplines out there for men. There are also local services which will support men as well. So things are better now in terms of the services available, but we still have huge hurdles to get across to actually encourage more men to come forward and also to make them more aware of those services which are there, which are for them. And that's really a responsibility of the councils and society in general, rather than putting the emphasis on men to actually reach out for those services. And very often, Alex, the conversation is about, well, men should man up, or it's men's fault that they don't actually get any help or seek any support. When actually responsibility is on society and public services to actually help more men come forward.
Couldn't agree more. Mark, thank you so much for coming and raising that issue. It's very important that we balance it out. And, you know, it's horrible wherever you find it, domestic abuse. Remember, we are putting helplines up on our Twitter feed if you believe you are a victim of domestic violence, abuse or coercion. That was, of course, Mark Brooks, chairman of the Mankind Initiative. Now, Sussex Police and Crime Commissioner KATY BOURNE joins me. KATY, how big... Let's go back to violence against women. How big do you think violence against women is? Do you think it's on the up?
I think it's always been an issue in society. It's great that we're talking more about it now and that people recognise it more. But certainly it's one of the most biggest issues when police respond to 999 calls. Probably about 20% of all that they turn out to is around domestic abuse or domestic abuse related.
Read that stat, about 1 in 5 police call-outs are going to domestic abuse. I mean, what can be done? Why is this still taking place in society today? And what can we do to eventually turn the corner and make society a safer place for both men and women?
I think years ago, you know, it was considered a bit of a domestic, and so very often police forces didn't often turn out. They didn't give the right response for victims. Victims didn't feel supported. They wouldn't come forwards, and so on. I mean, the tide is definitely turning, and certainly since I've been in this role nearly 9 years, we've seen a vast step change in how police deal with domestic abuse, how they will turn out to those calls. Their understanding of it is great. What we really need to see, though, is that consistency now across the country. And then when victims do come forward, to make sure they're properly safeguarded, and then they get the justice that they want as well, because there's still pockets of inconsistency around. We need to make sure that all those new recruits that the government are bringing in, which is fantastic, we need to make sure that they're properly trained and they understand how to respond as well. So, you know, this is a societal problem that we've had for many years. Violence against women and girls has been around for decades, and it's always been swept under the carpet, but now we're talking about it, so it's great. Now it's important that leaders step up and say, OK, so what are we going to start doing about this, and what are we going to do differently?
Do you think it would help having these sorts of conversations in schools? We're not talking about the youngest of children, but actually pointing out to people as they reach their adolescence, as they start forming adult relationships and you know, perhaps finding partners that they're going to move in with or spend their time with. Do you think it's necessary to perhaps explain to school children early warning signs? What is acceptable behaviour, what isn't? How the services they can potentially reach out to, or how they might be able to curb some of their own poor behaviours?
You're spot on. There's a lot of evidence and research that shows actually Year 8 pupils are the ideal time to go into schools. And in Sussex, we've just been successful in getting nearly £1 million of funding from government to tackle violence against women and girls across the whole county. And one of the areas we're actually going to go in is that preventative piece in schools. So we're going to be working in about 130 different schools, really focused on Year 8 pupils, teaching them about healthy relationships. What's a positive relationship? You know, what does stalking look like? What's inappropriate behaviour? And also how to call it out as well. And we're also going to do a lot of training around what we call don't be a bystander, but be an upstander. So don't sit back and watch it happen and almost accept it, but actually how to empower young people as well to step up and call these things out from the start. So if they learn at an early age that this sort of behaviour is inappropriate, it will definitely trickle down further line. The prevention is absolutely key.
Yeah, sticking on the concept of prevention, do you think that this sort of interrelates with a wider societal sickness of essentially where commodification and objectification seem to be eclipsing older values of hearth and home?
I think you're right, it is absolutely a societal problem, but it's endemic in everything we do. You know, it's our language. If we look at, for example, if we talk about some of the behaviours of stalking, for example, when you're on social media, the way you become a friend to someone is you follow them. And of course, what sort of subliminal message are you sending out there that actually to follow somebody means you like them? Now, that's pretty, innocuous in some terms, but actually, unless that's taught and people understand this, and by that I mean young people particularly, we're never going to change things around. I think we have a massive opportunity here. Policing is going through a real step change. It's been very, very difficult what's happened to them, certainly in the last couple of weeks as well, since the murder of Sarah Everard in the last few months and so on. And I think this is an opportunity, and certainly I and police and crime commissioners are having those moments with our chief constables where we're saying, okay, this is our opportunity to really do something different. So instead of doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome, what can we do? So I think a big part is the prevention piece with young people. How can we educate them about positive relationships, healthy relationships, and how to call those things out and feel empowered to actually stand up and say, no, that behaviour is wrong. Then it's looking at forces themselves, looking at how they vet police officers, looking at are there those opportunities to revisit the policies, the procedures? Are there avenues for officers themselves to call out that sort of behaviour effectively, and what are the sanctions around it? And even the promotion process for officers. Is there an opportunity perhaps for us to positively reward the kind of behaviour where things are called out in that promotion process? And then finally, it's the criminal justice piece as well. So for the victims themselves, are we really supporting them through that criminal justice process? And are they getting those positive outcomes that the victims themselves want? So there's a massive piece of work here to do. It's not just down to policing, it's down to all the agencies, whether it's schools, police, local authorities, all of us, police and crime commissioners, chief constable, everybody. But I think now is the absolute moment to step up and start changing things for good. Because I do not want my stepdaughters, who are now in their 20s, to be mothers in years to come and having these same conversations with their daughters that I've been having with my mother and she had with hers.
Katy, I couldn't agree more. Let's hope it is a seminal moment. Indeed, it's 2021. It's about time it should be. Katy Bourne there, Sussex Police and Crime Commissioner, fighting the good fight. Well, finally, let's get the views from a survivor, ZOE DRONFIELD, a campaigner and a board member at the Paladin National Stalking Advocacy Charity. ZOE, what were your experiences? How did you suffer as a victim of stalking?
Well, I was in a relationship and I was trying to end the relationship, and that's when the stalking started. This went over a number of weeks and the police response was not great. So I thought I'd go and speak to him and talk sense into him. I now realise that was, I put myself in a dangerous situation and I almost lost my life. However, it was everything that happened afterwards that I had to deal with that was worse, because I was, as a victim of domestic abuse, you're dealt with differently. You're somehow victim blamed at every avenue. When I was speaking to police officers afterwards, the comments that I got were quite derogatory. And I was even, while the perpetrator was in prison, I was being contacted. So the stalking was continuing. The police response was, don't answer your phone. And I said, but this is witness intimidation. He's actually in the justice system now. So in the end, we did manage to get him for the witness intimidation. But if the police aren't recognising these behaviours, what chance do we have?
Do you think that society is getting better when it comes to women feeling safe, feeling protected, having avenues to go down when they're not? Or do you think there's actually been a deterioration?
No, I don't think it's getting better. And you can just, with what's happened lately with Sarah Everard and Sabina Nesso, I mean, it's just, it feels like it's frightening out there. And the fact is now that we have even less confidence in the police. And, I think 100% prevention is really a key part of what we're doing here around reducing the numbers of domestic abuse and violence against women and girls. However, this also should point at the police as well. You know, something I've campaigned for 7 years now, along with other campaigners, is that serial offenders, known serial offenders, are put on a register, which, when I say put on a register, I'm not saying a new register, the VISA register that already exists that sex offenders are put on. If they are put on a register to be tracked and monitored, which means that we are putting our focus on the highest of harm perpetrators. You know, we can't put everybody into one pot. You know, there's different levels of risk, and these ones are the more likely to be committing homicide. Should we not be focusing on that? I just don't understand. It was meant to be in the domestic abuse bill. It got pushed back from both houses, House of Lords, the House of Commons. We got agreement through the House of Lords. The House of Commons kept pushing back. And then they agreed loosely of this new super database. What does that mean? The data exists today. We could be using that data now to reduce those numbers. I don't understand why we're not doing that.
As a survivor of abuse and now a campaigner, what's been your experience of people's reactions when you're raising these sorts of issues?
To begin with, and when I first was going through it back in 2014, and when my story first broke, it was quite shocking that people were just like, why are you talking about this publicly? Aren't you embarrassed? Well, no, I'm not embarrassed. Why should I be embarrassed? I didn't commit the crime, and that's the problem, isn't it? It's people's attitude towards this. It was like child abuse years ago. We need to speak about it more. I didn't do anything wrong. I never chose to be in an abusive relationship. They don't walk around with 3 heads. So we need to change this culture response to victims of domestic abuse.
And in terms of how long did your abuse go on for, and what was it that made you finally able to walk away from it and go and seek support?
Well, I mean, I'd been in the relationship for about a year and things were breaking down, so I'd asked him to leave. Now, that's when the stalking started, so I wasn't able to conduct my life, so I had to call the police. He was turning up at my house, he was calling me hundreds of times a day, WhatsApp, Facebook, I just could not conduct my life at all. And the police response wasn't great, so I went and met him. So it actually almost ended with me losing my life and my children being motherless. So I didn't get the support that I needed. And that is a problem as well. If the police response isn't great, and if anybody's listening and they're going through something like this, and you have gone to the police and don't get the response that you want, please don't not try again. And also, please reach out to domestic abuse and stalking charities, because advocates at those charities are trained. It's specialist trained advocates in this, and they can help you and advocate on your behalf with the police.
It's a very important message. Zoe, thank you for coming on and sharing your experience with us, and also encouraging people who might be at home today, male or female, doesn't matter. If you think you are a victim of domestic abuse, please reach out and get yourself help. There's lots of support out there. You've just heard from Mark Brooks, the chairman for the Mankind Initiative, a survivor, campaigner and Paladin National Stalking Advocacy Charity board member ZOE DRONFIELD, and Sussex Police and Crime Commissioner KATY BOURNE. After the break, you, the viewer, will get the final word. See you in a couple of minutes. You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
We've heard what a lot of our guests have had to say, and we've just enough time now to hear what you, the viewer, have to say on this topic. We've been asking, should prevention of domestic violence be on the school curriculum? Austin says, personally, as a parent, I think it's my job to teach my children morals. I only expect the school to provide them with an education to help them progress professionally in life. Everything else is a parent's responsibility. Minde says, I voted yes, but then thought that this is the parents' responsibility, which should be reinforced in schools by open discussions. Anne-Marie says, what happened to parents teaching their kids traditional values? Respect, be honest, be kind, courteous, empathetic, sympathetic and understanding. If everyone practiced those values, there'd be no violence in the world. And Peter says, no, parents should be raising their kids, not the state. You can't learn morals at school and then not practice them at home and expect them to take them seriously. Remember, we have put on our Twitter feed contact numbers if you've been listening to the stories we've been covering today and think that you need to reach out on behalf of you or on behalf of someone else. Those details should be on the Twitter feed. And I urge anybody who thinks they're in a situation of risk to do act now. Sheila says, stop making schools, police, etc. a part of the social services. Parents are responsible for their children, not these other groups. Daniel says equality and respect for others as individuals does need to be taught. Safety in the workplace needs to be taught. Most other social things are not good for the school to teach, but this subject is massive, though. Jacob says, discussions about all violence should be discussed at a young age. Men are far more likely to be the victims of attack than women. Stop this gender garbage and tackle the problem properly. Not sure it's always gender garbage. Harry says, let children be children. Teach them respect in all that they do. Jackie says we need to change how men view women and stop porn being so easily available. I doff my cap. I agree. Peter says no, parents should be raising their kids, not the state. You can't learn morals at school. Quite agree with that, but sometimes not all parents are doing the right things, are they? Now, 51% of you agree that perhaps we should be talking about this subject to adolescents at school if we're going to turn the corner at last in the 21st century and make violence against women a thing of the past. Fingers crossed, eh? I'm Alex Phillips and you've been watching We Need to Talk About. And for the last hour, we've been talking about violence against women. That's it for today. I'll see you next time.
Rupa Hook, your parents were from what is formerly known as East Pakistan. You grew up in London in the 70s and 80s. Did you experience racism?
I grew up in Ealing, which is the seat I now represent. And yeah, where my parents came from is present-day Bangladesh. I think it was British India, East Pakistan, Bangladesh. My grandmother used to say that she'd lived in about 4 different countries without moving house once. But yeah, of course, if you're my age, yeah, you got called Paki, those kind of things. I mean, I think the first time I was called it was probably 1977 or thereabouts, the very start of my school career. And I corrected the kid who said it, and I said, no, it's Bangladesh. It's been independent for 6 years now, get with it. And that sort of startled the kid who just called me Paki, because I'd corrected them on their geography.
Did it hurt?
I mean, I guess the very first time it was a bit surprising and shocking, and then after a while you sort of, I don't know, internalise it and bat it off in the same way that in our job, you know, on our timelines, we get rubbish every day. I don't massively advertise mine. But yeah, I mean, yeah, it was hurtful. And again, my parents always said to me that you've got to be that bit better.
When did you decide you were Labour?
Do you know, I think it was Neil Kinnock. My parents were always Labour, and I think that's, you know, people say immigrants have a loyalty to, or you know, or at worst blindly vote Labour. But I think it was Neil Kinnock and his rousing speeches every time in defeat. If the Tories win on Thursday, I warn you not to be sick and not to be old and not to be poor. So that kind of stirred something in me, watching on the sofa in Ealing. And he was actually just down the road because he was always there. Back in the day, the policeman outside the door after another defeat and someone had thrown an egg at the window or whatever. So I think it was Neil Kinnock.
Your sister is Connie Hook, the TV presenter. What is it like growing up with a famous sister?
Well, I mean, she wasn't famous at the time, but she was always a bit of a cheeky thing. So, I mean, growing up, it was a weird existence because it was, I mean, for example, our parents spoke to each other in Bengali and to us in Bengali. We always answered back in English. Every party knew what the other was saying. There's nothing I would ever say, or Connie would say, or my older sister that would surprise them, or vice versa, because their language had kind of stunted in the 60s when they came over, so they weren't learning new phrases or anything. But yeah, she's 3 years younger than me, so she got away with murder, basically. So immigrant family, one of three. Oldest one wasn't allowed to go out of London for university, very mollycoddled. Me branched out a bit more, had a Saturday job in WH Smith's. That was a bit of a fight to be allowed to do that. Connie had Saturday jobs in central London, meeting famous people. And then when she was in the sixth form, she blagged it at an audition for a satellite kids channel. I went as the grown-up with her. She got the job, and next week she was interviewing Take That, and who else? Tasmin Archer, who was #1 at the time, sort of all the stars of yesteryear. And she was still a sixth former. She was given a pager. This is before mobile phones, so it used to bleep when she's in double chemistry and say, come and interview whoever it was, and she would be off.
So I was reading when you were a postgraduate at Strasbourg University. You also worked at the European Parliament for the Labour Party. You were sexually harassed by a male MEP at this time.
Yeah, I have to say, this is something I kind of had forgotten about until the whole Pestminster thing broke a couple of years ago. And then I did some interviews and they said, has it ever happened to you? And then, you know, you sort of park these things and I thought, gosh, yes, it has. I used to work for Carol Tongue, MEP. That was the tongue job. And I do remember that every year there was a trip with these MEPs and their wives, I think, to an apple scrumping thing, orchard in Strasbourg, and cider, and the menu very apple themed. I think that's what it was. And on the way back in the minibus, I suddenly felt someone's hands kind of going up my skirt, and this was a then sitting member of the European Parliament.
How old were you?
And I was 22, 3, something like that. And I slapped him quickly. I was startled because you don't expect that. It's also like, yeah. And yeah, just was a bit shocked because it was dark by then. This is the trip back in the minibus with all the, and I think I'd blagged in as I think someone had said I think I'd blagged in as Madame Terry Wynn. It wasn't Terry Wynn. He was an MEP at the time. I think people had taken other people's places at this trip. Like sometimes I used to blag in as Connie Huck to, I think I saw Kylie once under that disguise with my mum. I think I was Connie Huck, my mum was +1 on that occasion. But anyway, yeah, no, it was a bit startling and shocking. And I told my then chap, and yeah, he said, you know, a bit like Johnny Rotten on the famous Bill Grundy show, the dirty effing rotter. And, but I mean, in those days, it was sort of, yeah.
Final question. Who do you reckon's happier? Connie Hook, the TV star,
wife of Charlie Brooker,
the wife of Charlie Brooker, or Rupert Hook, Member of Parliament for Ely.
It's not a competition. Come on, it's not a competition. I have the best job in the world because I represent my home community. Seriously, these are people who taught me. That first election, I remember, teachers, people like that, I was knocking on their door like, hang on, isn't it you from Double Maths or whatever? So it is an amazing honour and privilege. All my old neighbours, a woman, Auntie Marjorie, I went to her 90th, that was 2 years ago. She's just a woman from up the road, the house we grew up in, she taught me the piano. My mum used to leave us with her when she was learning how to drive.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.